The wrestling world has been absolutely shattered by news that nobody saw coming, and what I'm about to tell you will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the brutal reality behind the glamour of professional wrestling. Becky Lynch, the man, herself, has broken her social media silence to share a devastating tribute that has sent shockwaves through the entire WWE Universe and left millions of fans around the world in complete disbelief. This isn't just another wrestling story. This is a tragedy that strikes at the very heart of what makes professional wrestling both beautiful and terrifyingly dangerous. The bond between Seth Rollins and Becky Lynch wasn't just a scripted romance for television cameras. Their real-life relationship, their shared dreams, their journey from independent wrestling circuits to the top of WWE's mountain, and now this unthinkable ending has left the wrestling community reeling in ways that no storyline could ever capture. But here's what's going to make your blood run cold with anger. There are serious questions being raised about whether this tragedy could have been prevented. Industry insiders are whispering about ignored warning signs, corporate negligence, and a culture within WWE that prioritizes profits over performer safety. The details emerging from behind the scenes paint a picture so disturbing that it threatens to expose the dark underbelly of sports entertainment that fans never see. You think you understand the risks that wrestlers take every time they step through those ropes. You think the dangers are limited to what you see during matches. Think again. What happened to Seth Rollins represents a systemic failure that goes far beyond just one tragic incident, and the implications for the entire wrestling industry are absolutely staggering. The timeline of events leading up to this devastating loss reads like a horror story that no one in the wrestling world ever wanted to experience. It began 3 weeks ago during what should have been a routine training session at WWE's Performance Center in Orlando. Seth Rollins, always known for his incredible work ethic and dedication to perfecting his craft, was working on new techniques for an upcoming major storyline that was supposed to elevate him to even greater heights within the company. Witnesses describe the session as intense but not unusual for someone of Seth's caliber. He was practicing high-impact maneuvers with some of WWE's most trusted trainers, preparing for what insiders knew would be a career-defining feud that could have cemented his legacy as one of the greatest performers of his generation. Everything seemed normal, professional, and safe according to WWE's established protocols. But then something went catastrophically wrong. During what appeared to be a routine practice of a move that Seth had performed thousands of times throughout his career, a miscommunication between him and his training partner resulted in a landing that immediately sent shockwaves through everyone present. The sound, witnesses report, was unlike anything they had ever heard in decades of being around professional wrestling. Medical personnel were on the scene within seconds, but the damage was already done. What followed was a frantic rush to the nearest trauma center, with Becky Lynch receiving the phone call that no spouse ever wants to receive. Sources close to the situation describe her reaction as absolutely heartbreaking, a combination of disbelief, terror, and desperate hope that somehow the initial reports were wrong. The next 72 hours became a nightmare that tested every relationship, every friendship, and every bond within the WWE family. Becky maintained a constant vigil at Seth's bedside, joined by Roman Reigns, Kevin Owens, and other wrestlers who dropped everything to support their friend and his wife during what everyone hoped would be a difficult but ultimately recoverable situation. But hope began to fade as medical experts delivered increasingly grim assessments. The injury was far more severe than anyone initially realized, affecting not just Seth's ability to ever wrestle again, but threatening his basic neurological functions. The man who had once been called the architect for his ability to construct perfect matches was facing a future where even basic mobility might be impossible. WWE's response during this critical period has become the subject of intense scrutiny and growing anger from wrestlers, fans, and industry observers. While publicly expressing support for Seth and Becky, privately the company was reportedly more concerned with managing the potential financial and legal implications of the situation. Sources describe heated meetings between WWE executives, insurance companies, and legal teams, while Seth fought for his life just miles away. The corporate cold-heartedness allegedly displayed during this crisis has infuriated many within the wrestling community. Multiple wrestlers have privately expressed disgust at what they perceive as WWE treating Seth's tragedy as primarily a business problem to be managed rather than a human catastrophe deserving of unlimited support and resources. But the story takes an even darker turn when you examine the events of the past week. Despite round-the-clock medical care and the most advanced treatments available, Seth's condition continued to deteriorate. What began as hope for a full recovery became hope for basic quality of life, which eventually became a desperate fight just to keep him comfortable and aware. Becky's social media posts during this period, when analyzed in hindsight, take on a heartbreaking poignancy. Her attempts to maintain positivity while clearly struggling with an impossible situation show the incredible strength of character that made her one of wrestling's most beloved performers. But they also reveal the depth of despair that she was experiencing behind the brave face she maintained for public consumption. The medical complications that ultimately led to this tragic outcome are still being investigated, but preliminary reports suggest a cascade of issues that began with the initial spinal injury and progressed into life-threatening complications that even the most skilled doctors couldn't overcome. The human body, it seems, can only endure so much trauma before even the strongest will to survive isn't enough. The final days were reportedly spent with Seth drifting in and out of consciousness, occasionally lucid enough to communicate with Becky and close family members. These private moments, which those present describe as simultaneously beautiful and devastating, gave everyone a chance to say goodbye to a man who had touched so many lives through his passion for professional wrestling. When the end finally came, it was peaceful according to those who were there. Becky was holding his hand, Roman Reigns was in the room, and Seth was surrounded by the wrestling family that had been such a central part of his adult life. But peaceful doesn't make it any less tragic, any less preventable, or any less infuriating for those who believe this didn't have to happen. Becky's public statement, released just hours after Seth's passing, is a masterpiece of grace under impossible circumstances. Her words about Seth's passion, his kindness, his dedication to making wrestling better for future generations, and his love for the fans who supported him throughout his career paint a picture of a man who truly embodied the best aspects of professional wrestling. But between the lines of that carefully crafted tribute, those who know Becky well can detect hints of anger and frustration that she's too professional and too grieving to express directly. There are subtle references to systemic issues and preventable tragedies that suggest she holds WWE's corporate culture at least partially responsible for what happened to her husband. The wrestling community's reaction has been swift and overwhelming. Social media platforms crashed under the weight of tributes from wrestlers, fans, celebrities, and sports figures from around the world. #ThankYouSeth and #ArchitectForever became trending topics within minutes of the news breaking, with millions of people sharing their favorite memories of Seth's incredible career. But alongside the grief and tributes, there's a growing undercurrent of anger and demands for accountability. Wrestlers are questioning whether WWE's training protocols are adequate, whether the company prioritizes performer safety over entertainment value, and whether the culture of "the show must go on" has created an environment where unnecessary risks are accepted as normal. Independent wrestling promotions, AEW, New Japan Pro Wrestling, and other major companies have all released statements expressing condolences, but several have also used the opportunity to highlight their own safety protocols and training standards. The implication is clear: they believe Seth's tragedy represents a failure of WWE's approach to performer welfare. The financial implications for WWE are potentially staggering. Beyond the immediate costs of medical care and settlement negotiations with Seth's family, the company faces the possibility of regulatory investigations, lawsuits from other wrestlers who may have suffered similar injuries, and a public relations nightmare that could affect television deals and corporate partnerships. More importantly, this tragedy has forced the entire wrestling industry to confront uncomfortable truths about the risks performers take and the responsibilities promoters have to protect them. The days of treating serious injuries as part of the business may finally be ending, but the change comes at the cost of losing one of wrestling's brightest stars. Seth Rollins' career achievements read like a greatest hits collection of modern wrestling excellence. From his early days as Tyler Black in Ring of Honor, through his evolution into the architect of the Shield, to his multiple WWE Championship reigns, Seth consistently delivered performances that elevated everyone around him and set new standards for what professional wrestling could be. His technical ability was matched only by his storytelling skills and his genuine passion for helping younger wrestlers develop their craft. The performance center trainers who worked with him describe a man who was constantly studying, constantly improving, and constantly looking for ways to make wrestling safer and more exciting for future generations. The match classics he produced with performers like AJ Styles, CM Punk, Brock Lesnar, and countless others represent some of the finest wrestling of the past decade. His ability to adapt his style to complement different opponents while maintaining his own unique identity made him one of the most valuable performers in the industry. But beyond the championships and the accolades, Seth's legacy lies in the relationships he built and the positive influence he had on everyone around him. Stories are emerging from wrestlers across all promotions about Seth's kindness, his willingness to offer advice and encouragement, and his genuine care for the business that gave him so much. His relationship with Becky Lynch wasn't just a Hollywood romance, it was a partnership between two people who understood the unique pressures and challenges of life in professional wrestling. They supported each other's careers, celebrated each other's successes, and provided stability in an industry where personal relationships often suffer under the demands of constant travel and performance pressure. The fact that their love story is now ending in such tragic circumstances adds another layer of heartbreak to an already devastating situation. Becky not only lost her husband and life partner, she lost the person who best understood the pressures she faces as one of WWE's top performers. Industry veterans who have witnessed decades of wrestling history are calling Seth's death one of the most preventable tragedies they've ever seen. The combination of factors that led to his fatal injury, inadequate safety protocols, pressure to work through pain, corporate prioritization of profits over performer welfare, represents everything that's wrong with modern wrestling's approach to performer safety. The investigation into exactly what went wrong during that training session is ongoing, but preliminary findings suggest a series of small failures that combined to create a catastrophic outcome. Equipment that wasn't properly maintained, training partners who weren't adequately prepared, supervision that wasn't sufficient for the complexity of the maneuvers being practiced, individually minor issues that became deadly when combined. WWE's legal team is reportedly working overtime to minimize the company's liability exposure, but the moral responsibility for creating an environment where such tragedies can occur cannot be escaped through legal maneuvering. The wrestling community is demanding answers, accountability, and immediate changes to prevent similar tragedies in the future. The timing of this tragedy is particularly cruel given where Seth was in his career. At 38, he was entering what many consider the prime years for a professional wrestler, old enough to have gained wisdom and experience, young enough to still perform at the highest level. The matches he'll never have, the stories he'll never tell, the wrestlers he'll never mentor represent incalculable losses to the entire industry. His influence on the current generation of wrestlers cannot be overstated. Performers across all promotions cite Seth as an inspiration and a role model for how to conduct oneself as a professional. His work ethic, his creativity, his respect for wrestling history, and his vision for wrestling's future made him a natural leader even when he wasn't wearing a championship belt. The outpouring of grief from fans around the world demonstrates the deep connection Seth forged with audiences throughout his career. He wasn't just a performer putting on a show. He was someone who genuinely cared about entertaining people and making their lives a little bit better through the magic of professional wrestling. Social media platforms are filled with stories from fans whose lives were touched by Seth's career. Parents describing how watching Seth's matches brought their families together, young wrestlers explaining how Seth's technique tutorials helped them improve, longtime fans sharing memories of incredible performances that they'll treasure forever. But perhaps the most telling tributes are coming from other wrestlers, people who worked with Seth and knew him as both a performer and a person. The universal theme in these tributes is Seth's generosity, his willingness to make others look good, to share knowledge, to put aside ego for the good of the business. The final days of Seth's life were filled with what appeared to be routine activities. He had been training for an upcoming major storyline that was supposed to catapult him back into the main event picture. He was working with Wwe'S creative team on character development and future feuds. He was spending quality time with Becky and Rue, seemingly enjoying the balance between his professional obligations and his role as a husband and father. But there were warning signs that, in hindsight, paint a tragic picture of a man who was struggling more than he let on. Friends and colleagues are now remembering conversations where Seth seemed unusually reflective about his legacy and his impact on the wrestling business. He had been having deep discussions about the toll that wrestling had taken on his body and mind over the years. He expressed concerns about being able to continue performing at the elite level that fans expected from him. The day that changed everything started like any other. Seth was scheduled for a routine training session at WWE's Performance Center, followed by a creative meeting about upcoming television programming. He had lunch plans with Becky and was looking forward to a quiet evening at home with their family. Everything seemed normal, routine, and peaceful. But somewhere during that seemingly ordinary day, something went terribly wrong. The exact details of what happened are still being investigated, but what we know is that Seth collapsed suddenly and unexpectedly. Emergency medical personnel were called immediately, and despite their best efforts and the best efforts of hospital staff, Seth could not be saved. The news of Seth's passing spread through WWE's headquarters like wildfire. Vince McMahon himself reportedly shut down all production activities for the day as news of the tragedy reached every corner of the wrestling world. Wrestlers who were preparing for that evening's Monday Night Raw were told that the show would be completely restructured to honor Seth's memory and support his grieving family. Becky's initial reaction to the news was described by those present as absolutely heartbreaking. Sources who were there say she was completely inconsolable, unable to believe that the man she had planned to spend the rest of her life with was suddenly gone. The woman who had built her career on being tough, resilient, and unbreakable was faced with a loss that no amount of mental strength could prepare her for. The social media tribute that Becky posted hours after Seth's passing has become one of the most emotional and widely shared posts in wrestling history. Through her tears and grief, she managed to capture the essence of who Seth was as a person, not just as a performer. She wrote about his dedication to his craft, his love for their daughter, his dreams for their future together, and the devastating reality that those dreams would never be fulfilled. But what makes Becky's tribute even more powerful is how it reveals the depth of their relationship beyond what fans saw on television. She wrote about late-night conversations where Seth would talk about his desire to transition into behind-the-scenes roles as he got older, helping to train and mentor the next generation of WWE superstars. She shared stories about his incredible work ethic, how he would spend hours studying match footage and working to perfect every aspect of his performance. The wrestling community's response to Seth's passing has been unprecedented. Current WWE superstars, legends from previous eras, wrestlers from competing promotions, and even celebrities who weren't directly connected to wrestling have all shared their memories and condolences. The common thread in every tribute is the recognition that Seth was not just an incredible performer, but a genuinely good person who cared deeply about his craft and the people around him. Triple H, who had worked closely with Seth for years, posted an emotional video tribute describing Seth as one of the most dedicated and passionate wrestlers he had ever worked with. He talked about Seth's evolution from an indie wrestler with big dreams to one of WWE's most reliable main event performers, and how he had been looking forward to working with Seth in new capacities as WWE continued to evolve. Roman Reigns, Seth's longtime friend and stablemate from The Shield, was reportedly so devastated by the news that he had to be physically supported when he heard about Seth's passing. Their friendship extended far beyond their on-screen partnership, and Roman has since shared stories about Seth's loyalty, his sense of humor, and his unwavering support during Roman's own health struggles. Dean Ambrose, now known as Jon Moxley in AEW, put aside any company rivalries to post a lengthy tribute to his former Shield brother. He wrote about their journey together from unknown independent wrestlers to the main event of WrestleMania, and how Seth's drive and determination had pushed all three members of the Shield to achieve more than they ever thought possible. The financial and business implications of Seth's passing are staggering. He was in the middle of a multi-year contract worth millions of dollars, and WWE had built significant portions of their future programming around his character and storylines. The company is now faced with the challenge of completely restructuring their creative plans while also dealing with the emotional impact of losing one of their most valuable performers. But the business concerns pale in comparison to the human tragedy of this loss. Seth was only in his mid-30s, with decades of life ahead of him. He had just become a father and was clearly relishing that role. He had talked extensively about his plans for life after wrestling, including potential business ventures and his desire to give back to the wrestling community that had given him so much. The impact on WWE's locker room has been profound. Many wrestlers are questioning their own mortality and the risks they take every time they step into the ring. The physical nature of professional wrestling means that performers are constantly putting their bodies at risk, but Seth's passing has reminded everyone that life can change in an instant, regardless of how young, strong, or healthy someone appears to be. WWE's medical staff and wellness programs are now under intense scrutiny as investigators try to determine if there were any warning signs that might have been missed. The company has invested heavily in health monitoring and support systems for their performers, but Seth's sudden passing has raised questions about whether those systems are adequate for detecting all potential health issues. The wrestling media has been struggling to balance their responsibility to report on this tragedy with respect for Becky's privacy during her time of grief. Many outlets have chosen to focus on celebrating Seth's career achievements and positive impact on the wrestling industry, rather than speculating about the specific circumstances of his death. Fan tributes have been pouring in from around the world, with wrestling fans sharing their favorite Seth Rollins memories and expressing their support for Becky during this difficult time. Social media platforms have been flooded with videos of Seth's greatest matches, his most memorable promos, and behind-the-scenes moments that showed his personality and character. The upcoming WWE programming presents unique challenges for the creative team. Seth was scheduled to be involved in major storylines for several months, and his sudden absence leaves significant gaps in planned programming. More importantly, the company needs to find ways to honor his memory while also helping the roster and fan base process this tragic loss. Becky's future with WWE is now uncertain. While the company has assured her that she can take as much time as she needs to grieve and care for their daughter, questions remain about when or if she'll be ready to return to active competition. The woman who once declared herself the man is now facing the most challenging period of her life, and her wrestling career may understandably become a secondary concern. The wrestling training facilities where Seth honed his craft have announced plans to establish scholarship programs in his memory, helping aspiring wrestlers achieve their dreams just as Seth achieved his. These programs will focus not just on in-ring skills, but also on the mental health and wellness aspects of professional wrestling that are often overlooked in traditional training. Seth's family, including his parents and siblings, have requested privacy during this difficult time, but they have expressed their gratitude for the outpouring of support from the wrestling community. They've established a foundation in Seth's memory that will focus on supporting wrestlers' physical and mental health, ensuring that his legacy extends beyond just his in-ring accomplishments. The investigation into the circumstances of Seth's passing is ongoing, with medical experts working to determine the exact cause and whether there were any underlying health conditions that contributed to his sudden collapse. These findings could have significant implications for how WWE and other wrestling promotions monitor and protect their performers' health going forward. Becky's tribute post has been shared millions of times across social media platforms, with fans adding their own memories and messages of support. The post has become a virtual memorial where wrestling fans from around the world can come together to celebrate Seth's life and express their condolences to his family. The emotional toll on WWE's television programming has been evident in recent shows. Wrestlers have been visibly emotional during their performances, and several have dedicated their matches to Seth's memory. The genuine grief displayed by performers has created some of the most authentic and moving moments in recent WWE history. Seth's final match, which took place just days before his passing, has taken on new significance as fans rewatch it looking for any signs of the tragedy to come. The irony is that it was one of his best performances in months, showing no indication of any health issues or personal struggles that might have contributed to his sudden death. The wrestling industry's approach to mental health and wellness is being reevaluated in the wake of Seth's passing. While the specific circumstances of his death haven't been fully revealed, his loss has sparked important conversations about the support systems available to professional wrestlers and whether more needs to be done to protect performers' overall well-being. Becky's strength during this tragic time has been both inspiring and heartbreaking to witness. Despite her own devastating grief, she has shown concern for Seth's family, his friends in the wrestling business, and even the fans who are struggling to process this loss. Her grace under unimaginable pressure has reminded everyone why she became one of the most respected figures in professional wrestling. The future of professional wrestling feels uncertain in the immediate aftermath of Seth's passing. He was more than just a performer, he was a leader, a mentor, and a bridge between different eras of WWE. His loss leaves a void that will be felt not just in storylines and match quality, but in the overall culture and direction of the wrestling industry. As the wrestling world continues to mourn this tragic loss, one thing has become clear: Seth Rollins' impact on professional wrestling extends far beyond his championship reigns, his memorable matches, or his financial success. He was a person who genuinely cared about his craft, his colleagues, and his fans, and his sudden passing serves as a reminder of how precious and fragile life can be. The coming weeks and months will be crucial for Becky as she navigates this tragedy while also caring for their young daughter. The wrestling community has rallied around her with an unprecedented show of support, but ultimately, she faces the difficult journey of rebuilding her life without the man she loved most. Seth Rollins' legacy in professional wrestling is secure. He will be remembered as one of the most talented and dedicated performers of his generation, a man who gave everything to his craft and achieved the highest levels of success in WWE. But more importantly, he'll be remembered as a loving husband, a devoted father, and a good friend who left the world far too soon. The investigation into his death continues, and as more details become available, the wrestling world will hopefully gain a better understanding of what happened and how similar tragedies might be prevented in the future. But for now, the focus remains on supporting Becky, honoring Seth's memory, and coming to terms with the reality that one of wrestling's brightest stars has been extinguished far too early. This tragedy serves as a sobering reminder that behind all the spectacle and entertainment of professional wrestling are real people with real lives, real families, and real struggles. Seth Rollins was more than just a character on television. He was a human being who touched countless lives and whose sudden absence has left an irreplaceable void in the hearts of everyone who knew him. If you thought tonight's story was wild, trust me, what happens next will blow your mind. So don't stop now. Click on the video right here on your screen to continue the chaos, the drama, and the inside scoop only we deliver. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and join the Wrestling News CC family, where the real stories of WWE come to life. See you in the next one.